Welcome to the 2021 Runaway and Homeless Youth National Grantee Training. Please welcome to the stage Dr. Sanzana Dean, Director of the Division of Runaway and Homeless Youth for the Family and Youth Services Bureau.
Good afternoon and welcome everyone to the General Federal Session of the RHY National Grantee Training. I'm Sanzana Dean, Director for the Division of Runaway and Homeless Youth, and I'm so glad that you have joined us today and hope that you've had the opportunity to join some of the awesome workshops and networking sessions offered over the last 2 days. Next slide, please. During our session today, you will hear from members of the RHY program team and our federal partners who will share information and updates on federal initiatives, research, program trends, as well as upcoming resources and products. Next slide, please. At the close of our session today, we will offer a tribute to Aaron Kelvington, who served as a member of the RHY program team. We will share a bit about his passion, commitment, and contributions to the RHY community and the legacy of friendship that carries on in his absence. Next slide, please. With us today, Chris Holloway, who is a RHY program manager in our central office in Washington, D.C. We have Keith Wallace and Jeff Daniels, regional program managers, as well as Anna Cody, human trafficking advisor in the Office of the Associate Commissioner. You'll also hear from Levi Bohannon and John McLaughlin, federal colleagues from the U.S. Department of Education. Next slide, please. I'll kick off our session by providing a few RYMUS data highlights and reminders. Next slide, please. First, I want to offer a reminder that the RYMUS repository is currently open for data upload through November 19th. So, as you can see, you have a few more days to get your data uploaded. The data upload period covers October 1st, 2020 through September 30th of 2021. I hope you've had an opportunity to join the RYMUS workshop session, consultations or workshop sessions held on yesterday afternoon. They're place today from 5:15 to 6 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time. As it relates to some upcoming resources and activities for RYMUS and data, we expect to publish a revised data manual in 2022, pending some clarification of data sharing requirements noted in the RHY Act and the regulations. You can also look forward to us reaching out to grantees through your FPO with an opportunity for a target discussion about challenges and ideas for improving data quality, and just to get general thoughts on what we can do to improve upon the RYMUS system. It's our goal to schedule these conversations as part of your existing bi-monthly calls with FPOs throughout the calendar year 2022. Next slide, please. So here you see we provided several links to RYMUS data resources, including the data manual, FAQs, and the user guide. You can also find additional resources on the RYTEC website. Next slide, please. Now, I'd like to turn it over to our next speaker, Mr. Levi Bohannon, Special Assistant for the Office of Secondary Education at the U.S. Department of Education. Levi?
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. My name is Levi Bohannon. I'm a Special Assistant in the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education at the U.S. Department of Education. I focus primarily on special populations, including students experiencing homelessness, in the foster care or justice system, or migrant and immigrant children and youth. It's an honor to be with you today, as this is an issue that is deeply personal to me. I myself was a youth experiencing homelessness in high school and in college. The instability in my life prevented me from prioritizing my education, and I remember wondering where I would stay, being completely on my own, and not having a clue where to start. I had no idea about the existing supports under McKinney-Vento or other resources from across the federal government and the grants to state and local education agencies and nonprofit organizations. It was my teachers and school staff that connected me to critical resources and role in higher education. It never occurred in charge of the administration and coordination of those resources. It is an honor to serve in this capacity, and I feel a strong sense of purpose and mission to improve the availability and impact of these services for others experiencing homelessness. The $800 million in funding from the American Rescue Plan set aside for homeless children and youth, also known as ARP-HCY, came to us in March. It has since turbocharged all of our operations, as well as the opportunities to collaborate with state and local education agencies and community-based organizations. It's our goal today to make you fully aware of what the department sees as its opportunities and priorities for the ARP-HCY program. On the next slide, you'll see that I'm going to be joined later on by my colleague, John McLaughlin, who has been an education program specialist with the McKinney-Vento Education for Homeless Children and Youth program since 2008. I had the chance to work with John back in 2016 when I was an advisor in the Office of the Secretary at the time, when the Secretary was John King, and he was Vice Chair of the U.S. Interagency Council of Homelessness. February, and work again with John and his colleagues from before when the ARP-HCY funding was appropriated. It's been a very busy 8 months of education and on to school districts while reviewing and approving state plans. So we've gotten to work a lot together this year. On the next slide, you'll see, in the first part of our updates from the U.S. Department of Education, I will provide an overview of the new opportunities and administration priorities for ARP-HCY. Many other federal agencies have American Rescue Plan funds that can assist people experiencing homelessness. So I'd also like to talk about efforts across federal agencies to coordinate, to prevent, and reduce homelessness, including with the U.S. Interagency Council for Homelessness, HUD, Treasury, and HHS. Then I'll turn it over to John, who will introduce the growing team in the Homeless Education Program Office at ED and highlight some of our main activities. We have some significant new homeless education data releases that may interest you, and he'll talk about the plan to track the impact of ARP-HCY funding over the next 3 fiscal years. Next slide, please. Until just a few days before President on March 11, 2021, we were not aware of the third round of elementary and secondary school emergency relief funds would also include $800 million set aside for children and youth experiencing homelessness. The main purpose of this funding is homelessness, who have become more difficult to identify and to connect to services during the pandemic and period of virtual instruction. Many have become disengaged, chronically absent, or have dropped out of school. For the past several years, while public school districts were identifying about 1.5 million homeless children and youth, we have been hearing that our appropriations could be better at under $100 per pupil, even though they had gone up significantly over the past 5 years. Now we have nearly 8 times the most recent appropriation of $106.5 million and 10 times what we have received on average in the past few years. For agencies and programs that did not receive pandemic relief stimulus funding, but who serve school-age children and youth, we would like to encourage collaboration with state and local education agencies, departments of education and public school districts, to help you identify children and youth experiencing homelessness, connect them to school-based supports, and also provide them with the wraparound services that they may need for their physical and mental health services supports. On the next slide, you'll see that the ARP-HCY program has launched, with almost all states having awarded their ARP-HCY 1 funds to local education agencies, which are at least $150 million of the $800 million to local education agencies, plus the $200 million for state-level activities. And we're almost halfway there. Already more than a third of states have had their plans approved or are ready to be approved. I greatly appreciate the states that have made an effort to award ARP-HCY 1 funds by the end of the school year or at the start of the summer to meet the immediate needs of homeless children and youth after an entire school year of online or hybrid instruction in most public school districts. We know this reduced their identifications of homeless children, connections to support services, and disengagement from learning. Furthermore, many states moved quickly to award 75% or more than $600 million that we dispersed back in July to greatly expanded numbers of subgrantees through the formula and the consortia. Nothing is more important to us than to see these resources extend to as many students and school districts as possible. On the next slide, you'll see what the administration views as unique opportunities of and priorities for the ARP HCY funding. We know that we are asking a lot of grantees to try to do many things. Collaborating with state and local education agencies may be familiar, but our encouragement to contract with community-based organizations may be new. Moreover, we're encouraging state and local education agencies to find community-based organizations that are well positioned to identify children and youth experiencing homelessness from historically underserved communities. We're getting a lot of questions about how to do this and what is allowable. Nevertheless, in reviewing ARP HCY state plans, we're also noticing that many states are using the opportunity of this additional funding for the next 3 years to innovate and expand their coordination and outreach. For example, many state departments of education are hiring state or regional system navigators for housing and higher education, and also for early childhood education and transportation. Moreover, many states are creating advisory councils that include people with lived experience of homelessness, and some districts want to hire youth who have experienced homelessness themselves to conduct outreach on McKinney-Vento rights and services in a train-the-trainer type of program. On the next slide, I'd like to make a few remarks on the interagency work with my counterparts across the Biden administration to make the most of the American Rescue Plan funds and other pandemic stimulus funding to both reduce and prevent homelessness. The U.S. Department of Education has been an active member of the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness for the past 10 years and are eager to have children, youth, families, and education forefronted again developed in this fiscal year. We are also committed to coordinating bilaterally with other agencies in a mutually beneficial way, whether it be by promoting access to emergency rental assistance programs managed by the Treasury Department or supporting unaccompanied homeless youth in the Youth Homelessness Demonstration Program managed by HUD. In fact, just last month, we were able to co-host a webinar with our partners in Treasury to share more information on American Rescue Plan funds. We also deeply value our partners in HHS on the runaway and homeless side and are glad to continue to speak and present at each other's stakeholders, as well as our early education program partners in ACF, including both Head Start and the Child Care Development Funds. For the past 4 years, the department has released an annual early childhood homelessness state profile report using our McKinney-Vento and Head Start data. And the last year, we also released a 5-year trend report. Finally, during the pandemic, we have been doing a great deal of coordination with the school health team at the Center for Disease Control to provide clear and actionable guidance to school districts as they prepare for and return to in-person instruction this year. We plan to take action later this fall to remind state and local education agencies of the right to immediate enrollment for students experiencing homelessness and not segregating students from regular academic programming. With that, for some program office updates on the Ed team and newest data releases. John?
Thank you, Levi. And hello, RITAC meeting, grantee meeting in Austin, Texas in 2018. So it's been 3 years. It's our second year of virtual meeting. I'm really delighted to be back with you. As Levi has been explaining, we have a great opportunity to have our programs collaborate, particularly at the state and local level. And I really appreciate that FISB invited us to present to you today about the American Rescue Plan for homeless children and youth, and just some of the latest data we have on youth experiencing homelessness on their own, racial ethnic data, chronic absenteeism. So I will do some of that in a minute quickly, but first I wanted to also highlight our growing and expanding team in the program office. We had reorganized in 2019, and at that time it was Brian Thurman and me. Brian also works on the foster care provisions, coordinates closely with the Children's Bureau. And just this August, we added Sophie Hart, a Presidential Management Fellow who works on the McKinney-Vento program, as well as Title III for English learners, and Heather Denny former state coordinator in Montana, who will focus fully on the American Rescue Plan for homeless children and youth. We've had a very busy year, as Levi was starting to explain, working with our attorneys and budget and policy people to divide up the $800 million into two pots of funds, one to get out very quickly in the spring before the school year ended in summer school, and then another one that we did an emergency rule to make sure that as many school districts as possible could get these funds, and that states would hopefully be awarding it to them at the start of this school year. Some states have, others haven't yet, but we have had a huge amount of questions from states with so much extra money. Questions about allowable uses of funds, what's reasonable and necessary certainly come up, and it has certainly kept us on our toes. But as Levi mentioned, one of the big priorities of the program is increasing identification of children and youth experiencing homelessness in all the different historically underserved populations, including unaccompanied homeless youth. And we know that RIE grantees are often nonprofit organizations, community-based organizations, and we think it would be great to have formal collaborations and contracts between our state departments of education and large school districts, and consortium covering smaller school districts and you. On the next slide, I just want to mention that all the information about our program and documents are here on a web page for ARP-HCY, as we call it. You can find out what your state's allocation is, what the amount the State Department of Education is allowed to reserve, for example, and other information about how the funds may be used in our FAQ page, and then the approved state plans. So if you'd like to see, well, actually the initially submitted plans are there, and we've already approved 15. We have another 10 in the pipeline. So as they get approved, they're also posted, and you're welcome to look at what your state is proposing. Then on the next slide, I'll go into some of our data updates. And just recently we released the 2019-20 school year data on EdData Express. And for that school year, we have seen a decrease from the 1.5 million or slightly more in the 2017-18 school year down to 1.28 million. This school year overlaps with the first 3.5 months of the pandemic. We don't know for sure what impact the pandemic had on identifying and reporting on children and youth. Certainly with virtual instruction, it was hard to identify in person, connect youth in person to services. This data collection also has racial ethnic counts of children and youth for the first time, and I'll be going over that shortly, and I hope that this will support the efforts towards racial equity we're seeing across homeless assistance programs. And we make these data available down to the school district level, both on EdData Express. We have an EdFacts page. We do some privacy protections, but you can see counts of unaccompanied homeless youth by school district. And actually recently, the National Center for Homeless Education aggregated these by continuum of care, because I know in many states you're planning your homeless assistance on that basis. The Youth Homelessness Demonstration Program grants, for example, would be on those continuum of care units. We also have data on chronic absenteeism on students experiencing homelessness that has finally been released publicly on EdData Express, March and July, and actually just last month, the 19-20 school year data were released. For the 18-19 school year, it's the most recent one that we have a national percentage. 36.8% of students experiencing homelessness were reported as chronically absent by their schools, meaning missing 10% or more of their instructional time while they were enrolled. We see this as a serious matter. We certainly appreciate the honesty of schools and states in reporting these data to us, but it will be a focus of ours to help states to reduce these rates. Certainly the American Rescue Plan funds can help us with that. We also have started releasing adjusted cohort or on-time graduation rate data on homeless students as a subgroup, and that's on also the EdFacts Initiative webpage. And for the most recent year, we have a national percentage, the 18-19 school year, 67.8% of students experiencing homelessness in high school, anytime grades 9 through 12, graduated on time in 4 years. We also publish 5 and 6 year extended rates, which are slightly higher. And so our National Center for Homeless Education will release trend reports on chronic absenteeism and the on-time graduation or actually high school completion for students experiencing homelessness early next year. So please look out for those announcements. Then on the next slide, I'd like to go a little bit more into our data so that you can see it and visualize it. We have been asking states to submit homeless student enrollment data down to the district level that's auditable and verifiable since the 2004-05 school year. And as you can see, back then we were maybe at about 600,000 students identified by districts. And then it peaked in the 17-18 school year at over 1.5 million. That was the year of the hurricanes in Texas, Florida, Puerto Rico, wildfires in California and Colorado. It has since gone down about 15% to the 1.28 million. But on average, there's been a 5% increase in homeless student enrollment in public schools over every year of this 16-year period. On the next slide, I want to show you some data on unaccompanied homeless youth by primary nighttime residents at the point of identification. So one thing to point out, I've highlighted the 1920 school year. We are at 112,000 or more such students identified by school districts. That is a slight decrease since the peak in the 18-19 school year, but it's only decreased by 3%, whereas total homeless student enrollment has gone down 15%. So clearly this population is staying at an elevated percentage as a subgroup. And then if you look at the 4 categories of primary nighttime residents, it's actually the one that's kind of the second of the 4 is our doubled up population is at 84.8%, nearly 85%, a 3% increase even over the 18-19 school year. Whereas all the other categories of those in shelters, this is at the point of identification, unsheltered, cars, tents and whatnot, and hotels and motels has gone down in the double digits. 31% decrease in sheltered unaccompanied homeless youth identified by school districts, 14% decrease for unsheltered, and nearly 25% decrease for those in hotels and motels, which would be a small group anyway, particularly for the under 18 population. Okay, so then on the next slide, I'd like to go over some of the racial ethnic background data of our students that we have finally started collecting and begun releasing. So if you look at the middle column, I have highlighted in yellow the top 3 categories. And at 38%, Hispanic or Latino students identified as homeless are the largest. Then the next largest category is Black or African American at 26.8%, and then white students at 25.6%. They're together, Hispanic and Black students make up 65% of our homeless student population. There are certainly racial disparities in who we're identifying and who is being served, and of course our effectiveness in preventing and ending homelessness. As you can see on the far right column, what percent each racial ethnic category is of all students. So while white students are 46% of all students enrolled in public school, they are only 25% of those identified as homeless. And certainly we see the push. Our National Association for the Education of Homeless Children and Youth, our National Center for Homeless Education, is focusing on equity among homeless students. And we hope this racial ethnic data will help them, as well as our collaborations with HUD and HHS grantees. Okay, and then on the next slide, I'll just mention our plans to track the impact of the ARP Homeless Children and Youth funding over the next 3 years. So we will be collecting from state departments of ed, all the districts getting the grants. That first disbursement generally goes to the existing McKinney-Vento grantees. Some ran new competitions. The second disbursement goes to probably the majority of school districts in the state, including through consortium. And so we'll get some data this December. We should get a full list by next December. And we get so much information from school districts, from state departments of ed at the school district and school level that we can link to it, including enrollment and identification, racial ethnic data, academic achievement in reading, math, science, graduation rates, chronic absenteeism. And the department has reserved $1 million for a national study and further technical assistance related to implementation of the program. So that was a kind of whirlwind overview of what we're doing at the national level. I thank you for listening, and on the final slide, just have our contact information. If you have any questions about the program and grantees in your state, please do not hesitate to contact us. On the next slide, you can see our email address, homelessed@ed.gov. the National Center for Homeless Education, homeless@serve.org. Please email us anytime. NCHE also has a toll-free call line number, and we are really eager to see a big increase in identification of children that we've lost touch with, lost count of in the past year or two, and then providing the full wraparound support services to help them get back on track and complete high school and go on to whatever they choose to do for college or their career. Thank you again for your attention, and to FISB for giving us this opportunity to speak to you. Now I would like to turn it over to Keith Wallace from FISB.
Well, good afternoon. For those of you who know Keith and I am not Keith Wallace. I'm Chris Holloway. We're dealing with a few technical difficulties here, and so we're going to pause for a moment and pitch some questions that we have received from the attendees to John and Levi now, because they've so graciously offered their time to us, and we want to make sure that anything that is fresh in your mind specific to John and Levi's presentation, that you have the opportunity to answer or ask those questions at this time. So what's happening in the background is those questions that you've put into the chat are being fed to us here. And I'm going to go ahead and ask John and Levi to join me back on screen so that I can offer these questions up to them and give them an opportunity to address them. So this is for whoever wants to handle it. John, Levi, just let me know. The question is, and this is from Judith Clark. She's one of our executive directors in Hawaii. And Judith wants to know if a McKenty-Vento coordinator is aware that there is a runaway arrest warrant out for a youth who is seeking help to enroll in school. Is the coordinator required to contact law enforcement? Oh,
sorry,
I don't think we have sound.
Yeah.
Thanks,
yes,
John.
can you hear me now? Yeah,
Yep.
So we have received that question many times, and our immediate enrollment provision does take precedence over everything else. So if a youth is eligible, fits the McKinney-Vento definition of homelessness, they should be immediately enrolled. If a state does have reporting requirements or mandates, the liaison doing the identification or a school-based contact should follow those procedures for making the report, but that should not delay identification and immediate enrollment.
Great, thank you. So next question is, and as you probably could have predicted this one coming, our attendees would like to know if RHY programs can access the AARP funds, and if so, how can they do so?
So I think there are two main ways. State departments of ed reserve up to 25% of their allocation for state level coordination activities. They may make grants or contracts to other organizations and other agencies. And several states have said that the RY grantees in their states would be appropriate to help support increasing identification of youth experiencing homelessness on their own. And then in terms of providing direct services, wraparound services even, that maybe some organizations already can do or have a network, school districts may make contracts with nonprofit organizations or community-based organizations to provide those services. Now, that may be new for them. It may take time to go through the procurement process. That's also true at the State Department of Education level. But these funds are available for 3 years until September 30th of 2024. So it would be worth having the conversations to see what's possible at both the state and school district level.
Great. So I suspect that response is going to elicit some additional questions. And so that's all the questions that we have up right now for you and Levi. However, I look forward to catching back up to you both at the end of the presentation and anticipate some additional questions for you both. At this time, I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Keith Wallace. We've been able to fix his audio. So Keith, take it away, sir.
All right. Thank you, Chris. Good afternoon, everyone. The following slides contain a lot of information, and as our time is limited, I'm just going to briefly provide an overview of each slide. So next slide, please. So as you can see, 674 grants were awarded in fiscal year 2021. with over a third of these awards being new. Some grantees do have more than one RHY grant. Therefore, 351 grantees are operating 294 basic center programs, 204 transitional living programs, 130 street outreach programs, and 46 maternity group home programs. Next slide, please. Now, this slide reflects the breakout for our total RHY budget among the 4 programs, which totals $47.8 million. Next slide. Now, please note that we are no longer referring to funding opportunity announcements, or FOAs. They're now called Notice of Funding Opportunities, or NOFOs. And as you can see, we anticipate 47 Street Outreach Program Awards and 68 Basic Center Program Awards to be included in the spring of 2022. Now, the maximum award for each year is $150,000 for street outreach, and for Basic Center Program, it's $200,000 each year for a maximum of 3 years. Next slide, please. And for the spring of 2022, we anticipate 83 Transitional Living Program Awards and 28 Maternity Group Home Awards, both with a maximum of $250,000 each year, and again for a maximum of 3 years. Next slide, please. Now, there were some great products released during fiscal year 2021. Now, for example, the National Clearinghouse provides a quarterly update to the literature review database. The COVID-19 webinar series provided by RITAC was well received and was found to be very helpful among grantees. And the Transitional Living Program Youth Outcome Study has provided some very helpful information and insight. Next slide, please. Now, due to restrictions on federal travel as a result of the pandemic, we have had to switch from on-site monitoring visits to a virtual site review, and you'll hear those referred to as VSRs. Now, virtual site review training will be released in fiscal year 2022, and I think most grantees will find it very helpful that have not experienced a virtual site review yet. Once again, once federal travel is allowed, we hope to return to on-site monitoring visits. And we're also excited about the program-focused peer-to-peer training that will be released soon from RITAC, as well as the upcoming performance outcomes training. And last but not least is the updated Needs Assessment Tools training, and that'll be provided by the RHY Clearinghouse. Now, I would like to introduce Anna Cody, who will be sharing information with you regarding the National Runaway Safe Line.
Thank you so much, Keith, and good afternoon, everyone. I am Anna Cody, and I serve as the Human Trafficking Advisor for the Family and Youth Services Bureau, as well as the Program Officer for the National Runaway Safe Line, which operates the national communication system for runaway and homeless youth. So first of all, I do want to start recognizing the work of the National Runaway Safe Line under the leadership of Susan Frankel for their commitment in their work, especially through COVID-19. They experienced shelter in place, lack of resources, but the Safe Line never shut down their operations. They were 24/7 and really connecting youth with services and providing support. So we really thank you for their work and their partnership for the National Runaway Safe Line. So next slide. I wanted to walk you today to a couple of the accomplishments from the last year to the work of the National Runaway Safe Line. The first is the social media campaign, Let's Step Forward Together, which is a social media campaign, a bilingual social media campaign that take off last year as a response of COVID-19. It's an idea to find ways to better reach out to youth when they were in shelter in place and there are lack of resources. So social media was the key to reach out to youth at the virtual platform. So this year we saw an immense response, positive response from youth to the campaign. So we really wanted to move forward with more ideas and strategies to reach out more youth. So the National Runaway Safe Line launched the Back to School campaign through the step forward through August and September 2021 via Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Snapchat, and TikTok. The target population were youth ages 15 to 17. We really put a focus on underserved communities and cities. So a lot of the cities that we reached out were Atlanta, Chicago, Detroit, Las Vegas, New York, and Florida, where they, with the same line, noticed a large number of youth experiencing homelessness and also a really diverse population being impacted by this issue as well. And you can see at the bottom some of the results, which are very exciting news for us through that period from maybe a month or we were able to reach out to 4.64 million youth through impressions, meaning that you were able to see the ads, the messages, and learn about the National Runaway Save Line. And also, we were able, or the Save Line team was able to reach out over 23,000 clicks, meaning that youth were actually clicking into the messages and going and navigating the website to get that information. So anytime they need it, they know where to find the National Runaway Save Line. We also learned that TikTok was the more more popular social media platform. One of the reasons was because Save Line shared with us it was the place where a lot of the youth were coming from to visit the website and learn more about the resources and the services provided by the Save Line. So you can see here 2 images, part of the campaign. It's a bilingual campaign. We really have a lot of input for the Save Line team as well as youth who help us shape the campaign. We really wanted to get the message out about the youth going through crisis. There is a place where they can reach out for support at any time. So next slide. Also, is an important piece of the work of the Save Line. We incorporate youth voices into our program. So as part of that effort, this summer, we had the opportunity to meet and learn from 9 brave young people who joined the National Runaway Youth Voices Roundtable to talk about their experiences in homelessness, their pathway to homelessness, but also what was helpful, what services were available, what services were not available, and how we can move forward to be more helpful. So here in the screen, you see 3 main areas that we thought that we learned a lot from the youth. The first one is homelessness and running away experiences. They say that, and we learn from what we hear from the youth, there is a critical need for increasing effective outreach effort focusing on youth. You say that they were going through a crisis, they didn't have options, so they had to leave home and they didn't know where the resources were or where to fund it. Number 2, the theme was services for youth experiencing homelessness. The youth really shared with us a lot of the barriers that they face were the criteria for accessing programs and services. And here are some examples: age, citizenship status, duration of the homelessness, so medical proof of disabilities. So they said it was a very challenging for them because they needed a place to stay, they need services, and they had to really wait for those services. So we also asked them what was helpful when they were going through this homelessness situation, and there were several services that they shared with that, but I think the one they were really meaningful for them was being connected to their service providers and mentors. So permanent connection is a big piece of Runaway and Homeless Youth Program framework, and the youth highlighted that piece. They remember their service provider and they stick to the program because of that connection with that person. And the number 3 here is moving forward, improving access to services. We asked them how we can do better. Of course, the youth voices should be always in the programming piece. Also accessing mental health services and health services in general for young people experiencing homelessness. Also, they say ways to integrate social media platforms into outreaching to youth. They said that even though they were experiencing some type of housing instability, they are able to go into social media, and that was the best place that they can reach for information. They talk about the importance of increasing awareness about the National Runaway Save Line in schools, in communities, and healthcare centers where youth are, and they can know about these resources before they even running away or contemplating running away. So there was a lot of information in that listening session. But if you miss it or didn't have the opportunity to join us on that event, you can still listen to the whole recorded session. We also put together a summary report that's going to be helpful for the field. You can use that information to inform your programs, to learn a little bit more what the pathway to homelessness and how we can all do much better. So next slide, please. So here we have every year the National Runaway Save Line collects data from those who are contacting their services. This is a voluntary data. So in the year 2020, they collected over 30,000 contacts through their digital services, online services, offline services, and data is always telling a story. So this year, the National Runaway Save Line, in collaboration with the FISB, released the Crisis Services and Prevention Report. We really provide a very detailed information about you who are reaching out the Save Line, why they're reaching out, whether the issues were raised, how the Save Line was able to help them. Also talks about, this is a very specific report on COVID-19. What the youth share about COVID-19, how COVID-19 impacted young people who were contemplating running away in crisis or experiencing homelessness. So it's a wealth of information and data that you can find in this report, but more importantly, it's very practical, that you can use it when you are discussing issues of homelessness or really informing your program when it comes to outreach. Here you can see in a PowerPoint key fundings that we wanted to highlight for you. The number of youth are reaching out to the Save Line. Really, we're seeing like younger kids or younger youth from the age of 15 and 12 reaching out to the Save Line. And that means that, they have access to digital services when they were at home through COVID-19 or really experiencing youth crisis and reaching out before even running away, which is our good news. Really, we know that digital services are becoming more popular among youth. That's the way that they communicate and they talk about their crisis. So we saw the Save Line team saw an increase in that particular platform. What they were calling for, what the issues were raised by the youth, they may contemplate them, thinking about the option of running away. Family dynamics is one on the top by 80% when we compare it to the last year. And we saw that increase. Family dynamics include from family violence, interaction with parents, asking the youth to leave the home. Also mental health come out this year. Is one of the issues, what you were considering running away or what you were homelessness, they were experiencing mental health issues. And over 500 contact really mentioned COVID-19 as the main topic or the main issue because of the crisis that they were calling the Save Line. So it's a wealth of information, as I say in the report, and we wanted to invite you to learn about the fundings. We are hosting an event on November 30 from 2 to 3:30 p.m. You can register. Here is the link. You can also go to the website and the National Runaway Save Line to see how you can join. We're really going to tell the story of what the data is telling us, the implication for our programs and for communities, and how we can elevate the voices of youth in the upcoming year. So please join us on November 30. Next slide, please. So here, this is the last piece that I wanted to share with you, and what is coming for 2022. We're still working on our plan, but I wanted to highlight a couple things for you to be ready to when they're out. So Let's Talk Curriculum, I don't know if you are familiar with Let's Talk Curriculum, is a prevention curriculum focusing on building youth skills to prevent running away incidents. We are in the process of updating the curriculum to be more up to date. So, and the Save Line team had divided into specific phases. The number one, we're going to release very early this year, and next year, the updated version. That means updated language, new redesign and branding of the Let's Talk curriculum, and we're going to provide training so you can learn how to use it in your programs and communities. And the second ones with the Save Line, call it the 2.0 version, is going to be the new and final version of the curriculum, where we're adding more modules to really reflect the needs of the youth. For instance, we're going to talk about social media platform, online safety, as well as human trafficking that really impact youth experiencing homelessness and those who are running away. We're also releasing a crisis intervention training for youth serving agencies. The National Runaway uses a model to really help decrease crisis among youth and being very successful. So we do, or the Save Line really wanted to bring that knowledge into the field. The training will be released maybe later next year. We're going to offer training for youth service providers, how to help in crisis intervention, how to use the model in your programs, and how to really connect and work in partnership with the National Runaway Save Line. We're also very, very excited. Next year, we're adding live texting as part of the digital services to the Save Line. And we know and we learn that, the digital platform are increasing when youth are contacting the Save Line. We're going to communicate with the youth and meet them where they are. So a Save Line is preparing their staff to really provide crisis intervention through texting. So it's going to be very excited when we release that resource. We're going to also, as part of National Runaway Prevention Month this year, the Save Line launched the Let's Talk podcast to really talk about the youth voices and integrate youth voices into National Runaway Prevention Month. And then we are expanding this podcast for next year to really talk about issues impacting runaway and homeless youth. And of course, the 2022 National Runaway Prevention Month is next year. We start very early in summer preparing for National Runaway Prevention Month. We are right now shining a light this year in November. So if you are now part of National Runaway Prevention Month, I do invite you to join that effort. In the next 2 weeks, we still have a lot of activities. Let's launch and learn next Tuesday, November 22nd and November 30 are our final and closing event for National Runaway Prevention Month. And with that, I wanted to thank you and introduce our next speaker, Chris Holloway.
Great. Thank you, Anna. So good to be with you all again. And unfortunately, we're not in person this year. We're hoping that we can come together next year in person. It's difficult when we don't have the ability to meet with you on a regular basis over the course of the 3 days of this event. The networking opportunities are great here in Hopin. And the platform is wonderful, but it doesn't take the place of face-to-face contact. So we're really looking forward to the possibility of being together in person next year. I'm going to take a few minutes and talk about a couple of the products that Keith pointed out in his remarks. First, I'm going to start with the youth outcome study. And on the next slide, the background here, and many of you have been involved in this over the years, is that this is the final component of a multi-year research initiative focused on examining the impact of transitional living programs in maternity group homes. So this most recent component began in 2017 and ended in June of 2021. And a final report was released this year and is now available. The study examined outcomes in 2 of the RHY program's 4 core outcome areas, to include safe and stable housing and employment or education. So we used data sets to examine information about youth who are enrolled in the programs in order to make some determination about their status once they exited programs. There was an additional emphasis on earnings in the examination of the employment outcomes, and that revealed some positive trends. Previous research efforts included a randomized control approach, RCT, with youth entering either a control group or a treatment group. And findings from that RCT approach are available in the Transitional Living Program Pilot Study Report. Both of those reports are available on the National Clearinghouse on Homeless Youth and Families website for download and review. Next slide, please. So who participated in the most recent component of this research? We had 30 transitional living and maternity group home programs across the country. 365 youth and young adults volunteered to participate in the study. We're grateful to all of you taking the time and commitment. It was an effort. It required additional efforts on your part. And we really, truly appreciate your willingness to be involved and help us out with the research. Of the participants, nearly 60% were female. 80% were over the age of 18 when they entered a TLP. So very few, obviously, were under the age of 18. Interestingly, there was a significant racial and ethnic diversity among the study participants, though I think we could probably all surmise that these numbers likely reflect the overrepresentation of Black and Brown youth and young adults in need of RHY services. So while it was comforting to see that we had good representation, obviously it highlights the disparity that we already know is endemic amongst the young people who are receiving RHY services. On the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about some of the findings, and I'm doing a very cursory overview of the findings for this particular study. In the area of housing, what we learned is that most participants remained enrolled during the lifespan of the study, which in and of itself speaks to a level of housing stability available to them while in the program. Of those who exited the program, less than 1 in 10, roughly 10%, experienced homelessness immediately upon exit from the program. The data suggests that, and this is a positive thing, and I think it reinforces the notion of the power of aftercare, is that these rates held 90 days after exiting the program. So we know that, at least in the group that were involved in this research, those that exited, 90% of them remained in safe and stable housing up to 90 days after leaving the shelter. In the education front, youth and young adult enrollment in educational programming was higher prior to TLP entry, interestingly enough. Of the small percentage of youth and young adults who were already in school at the time of entry into the program, those individuals stayed enrolled on average for nearly a year. We have to recognize what happened over the past 18 months, and the lion's share of the research was done while we were in the midst of a global pandemic. And so while we can't confirm with data, we could probably make some educated guesses that enrollment in educational settings was likely insignificantly impacted by COVID-19. Moving on to employment, in our next slide, thank you. An analysis of youth and young adult employment data suggests positive outcomes for those who were enrolled in a TLP when compared to enrollment prior to entry. So it's difficult to know for sure, but we could probably surmise, like the education information, employment stability was very much impacted by COVID-19. An added element here was focused on earnings, and we have a mix of good and bad. On the downside, only 20% of youth enrolled in TLP or maternity group homes earned income above the poverty line. And that is a very difficult statement to make. However, on the positive side, earnings for youth exiting the TLP were higher 3 to 6 months after exiting when compared to earnings before or during TLP stay. So I want to make sure I say that clearly, and I'll repeat it. Earnings for youth exiting a TLP were higher 3 to 6 months after exiting when compared to earnings before or during TLP stay. So that means there was a positive trajectory once those youth and young adults left the program. In the graphic here, there's a lot of information, and it takes a few minutes to digest it all. The one point I want to make is that 61% of youth exiting TLP were either working full or part-time once they left the program. So it's a positive number, but we also, in the next slide, recognize where the limitations are, and we have to be realistic about those limitations. Firstly, participation in this was voluntary. We offered incentives to young people, and we certainly offered incentives to the grant programs, the RHY programs that volunteered, but there was no control group. So we're not able to determine if outcomes would be similar if compared to youth and young adults not involved in TLP. Secondly, nearly 80% of the participants were still enrolled in TLP at the end of the study. And lastly, as I mentioned already, we did all of this work in the midst of a global pandemic. With all those limitations in mind, the research does reveal positives to reflect on, to include improvements in housing, employment, and earnings for many of the youth and young adults exiting TLPs and maternity group homes. So I certainly encourage you to take a look at the report for both the pilot study as well as for the TLP youth outcome study. All right, so I'm going to move on, and I'm going to talk a few minutes about the Grantee National Needs Assessment in our next coming slides. To start with, in the next slide, you can see what the purpose was. It was really intended to survey all the RHY grantees to determine training and technical assistance needs and prioritization of future events. Do we hold webinars? Do we develop toolkit resources? Do we have in-person training once we're able to come back together? The overview is really here that what the overview that I'm offering is intended to offer the preliminary findings from the study. This was done by Chapin Hall, and we appreciate all the hard work and effort they put into it. And there is a much more in-depth infographic available for you to review at the link that's on the slide. We anticipate the full report related to the National Needs Assessment coming out later this year or early in January 2022. So what did we ask you about in the survey? And you'll see in the next slide, it was broken into 6 different areas. We asked about background and organizational characteristics. We asked about training and technical assistance for monitoring visits. We wanted to know your training needs for operations around the 4 core outcome areas, as well as training needs related to performance measurements, particularly those while you were operating during and emerging from the pandemic. We talked about, or we asked about screening and assessment tools that you use in the training needs that you have related to those assessment tools. And finally, we wanted to know what evidence-informed and evidence-based practices you were using. So who completed the assessment? We'll see in the next slide. There was a range in the number of youth served annually by the grantees who actually responded. Nearly half served at least 100 each over the course of a year. There was also a mix of RHY funded programs the grantees offered. More than half of you who responded operate more than one program. 3 in 4 respondents operate a basic center program, while only 1 in 5 operate maternity group homes. So while we didn't get the response rate that we had hoped for, of those who did respond, we had a nice mix of grantees from rural, urban, large, small, including the full range of those that were involved in all 4 of the program types. And again, I have to acknowledge that when we're discussing the results here, or when you review the infographic, or when you see the final report, the survey results only indicates the responses to those who responded to the survey, and it does not reflect all the needs of all RHY grantees. So on the next slide, what we understand are the topic priorities. Approximately 80% of respondents wanted training and technical assistance focused on 4 core outcomes on the 4 core outcomes of permanent and positive connections and social and emotional well-being. Respondents also emphasized aftercare as a priority area under 2 core outcomes, both under social and emotional well-being and safe and stable housing. As we look to the last slide, thank you. When we talk about assessments and screening, a majority, 60% of respondents reported using between 2 and 5 assessments and screening tools in their programs. However, nearly 1 in 10 grantees reported not using any tools, while nearly 1 in 5 reported using 6 or more tools. And what we do know is that you're using tools that are focused on trauma, mental health, human trafficking, substance abuse, and family needs. And then moving on to the next slide. Lastly, we just wanted to focus, as I noted before, on evidence-based practices. More than half of the respondents reported their organization utilizes at least 6 evidence-based practices in their RHY programming, and the most common of those was focused on positive youth development, motivational interviewing, and trauma-informed care. That said, about 2/3 of grantees indicated needing TNTA to support implementation of evidence-based practices. So that did reveal for us that we need to provide more opportunities for you. And then before I pass this off to Jeff, I just want to say that the intention is to administer the needs assessment survey on an annual basis. So if these results don't reflect your organization's needs, please prioritize completing the assessment next year. The response rate for the survey was slightly more than 30% this year. That means that nearly 70% of grantees did not submit a survey. And we want to ensure that what we are doing with the delivery of training and technical assistance meets the needs of the majority of you, our programs that we rely on to provide services to young people. With that, I'm going to transition to Jeff Daniels, and he's going to talk about monitoring. Jeff.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Jeff Daniels here, Regional Program Manager for Regions 5, 8, 9, and 10. Bear with us, we're wrapping up here, but I want to talk to you a little bit about the program monitoring trends and insights. Next slide, please. So these are some of the trends and insights that we saw through the nation. We understand that there are certain trends and insights that present themselves for each region, for each state, even urban versus rural trends that we saw. But these were the ones that we saw for the most part nationally. So just looking at some of the positive aspects here first, we did see strong community connections and linkages for services. An example would be, we saw community volunteers providing life skills training for the programs. Another trend that we saw nationally was the use of technology. During this global pandemic, we really have seen creativity and imagination around technology and bringing people together, specifically providing services for the youth through the use of technology. We saw that grantees were using podcasts to provide free and accessible mental health and self-care to youth. We also saw a few grantees that were using secured apps that youth can use to stay in touch with the program and their case manager. So different ways to communicate, different ways to stay in touch during this time. And a big thing that we saw nationwide for many grantees, which is something relatively, I wouldn't say new, but we begin to see a trend, was the use of safe words during group counseling services, allowing youth not to answer a question if they didn't feel comfortable, and also in a group where they know where they're not comfortable with the content of the discussion. So speaking up there, we saw the welcoming of that in some of the positive trends. Next slide, please. So looking at the national trends as far as compliance issues, some of the larger compliance issues that we pointed out, documentation has always been an issue. We know it's difficult. We saw a lack of FBI and child abuse registry checks in employee files. Also, we saw a lack of notes and documentation in client files. And then, of course, we saw a lack of aftercare plans, discharge plans. We saw a few no plans for coordinating with their local McKinney-Vento liaisons or with grantees, McKinney-Vento liaisons. And we saw a lack of individual service plans as well. So these were some trends that we saw. Again, nationwide, we know that each state, each region, each grantee really has their own specific challenges and hardships, but we hope that we can build that and foster those relationships with your federal project officers and RITAC in overcoming and addressing some of these trends moving forward. So we just wanted to bring those to your attention, and hopefully we can work with you and helping to reduce these as we move forward. Next slide. So that's it for the monitoring trends. We're going to now open it up to questions. I will turn it back over to Chris Holloway as he will be the moderator and possibly reading the questions as they come in. So I'll turn it back over to Chris and we'll go ahead and start the questions.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. And obviously the rest of the group is here on screen with us. So welcome back, everyone. It's the Hollywood Squares for the federal session. We have a couple of questions that we're going to try to pitch out to everybody here. I'm going to go ahead and go back to John and Levi quickly. So the question is, you mentioned both racial and LGBTQ equality. Can you share how the administration's priorities in this area may impact grantees?
Levi, do you have anything first from the administration's perspective?
I do. Apologies. I was trying to find the unmute button. So there are a number of underserved communities that we think should be targeted with the ARP HCY funding. Those were articulated earlier in the deck that we shared. We really see this infusion of funding as an opportunity to not only identify students that maybe haven't been identified in the past, but also particularly to target historically underserved communities. That includes pregnant parenting, students who are experiencing homelessness, justice-involved students experiencing homelessness, LGBTQ+, students experiencing homelessness, and a variety of other students. John, do you have anything to add?
Thing I would say is that using the data, we also are looking carefully at academic outcomes for students experiencing homelessness. And of course, we also do academic outcome reporting by racial ethnic background. So if we can look at the overlap of students from different racial ethnic backgrounds experiencing homelessness and how that's connecting to the, reading, math, science achievement, graduation rates, chronic absenteeism, we would probably, raise that in conversations with states and school districts, for example, in our monitoring. Certainly, we'd like to see everyone focus on reducing chronic absenteeism as the first starting point, because so much of our program is about supporting students to attend school and fully participate in all school activities.
All right, thank you. Sanzana, I'm going to pose this question for you. With the federal mandate for contractors to be vaccinated, will it be expanded to include grantees?
Good question, Chris, and good question, grantees. At this time, the department has not provided any specific requirements that grantees will be required to maintain vaccinations for staff or youth. Of course, through the CDC and guidance that we've received about the efficacy of the vaccines, we are definitely encouraging our grantee programs and our young people to become vaccinated as you are comfortable, to seek out information. There is information in our training and technical assistance resources. We have a COVID link as well through both the Clearinghouse and RITAC that provides information about what the vaccine is, the impacts of the vaccine on slowing the transmission of COVID-19, and just how it benefits young people and the communities in which they live. So there are no requirements at this time, but we are definitely, as an agency, encouraging our young people and our grantees to remain safe. And a vaccine is one of the ways to do that. And we're doing everything we can to provide timely and accurate information to be able to support that decision. If there's any additional guidance, it will definitely be shared with you at the time it becomes available.
Great. Thank you, Sanzana. So this next one is for Anna. And first of all, Anna, someone in the chat responded that they were excited to see that NRS was going to live texting. And the question was actually pretty broad, but I think relevant given the information that you provided. And the question is, if a youth or young adult has left home and ends up in another city without resources or support, and they want to return home, what resources exist through NRS to help?
Well, they have different resources, but the first one that comes in mind is the Home Free program. The Home Free program provides free, it's a partnership between the National Runaway Safe Line and Greyhound. They provide free transportation to youth to anywhere. Reunification with parents is our primary goal, but also to take in to a place that is safe. That could be with a family member. It could be with a shelter program. And through that process, the Safe Line coordinate all the logistics, working with the youth, making sure the youth is safe, going to point A and B, and also providing and meeting all the basic needs that they will need through that journey. I think, and they also, the Safe Line has over 600 services and resources in their database, so they're able to connect youth with any resource that is available in the database, from food to basic needs, to shelter, to healthcare centers, mental health, and either communicating with their parents. Sometimes youth cannot have access to communicating well with the parents, so the Safe Line provide a line where they are on the call with the youth and the parents or the family member to make sure if reunification is possible, and then they take it from there. So there's so many ways the Safe Line can help. They're always adding resources if they see a need. So I do recommend reach out to 1-800 Runaway and learn about how about the new resources and what resources are needed in the local areas and the youth that they are serving.
Great, thank you, Anna. And I think we have time for one more question, and I'm going to pitch this one back to Levi and John. So the question is, can you talk more about the McKinney-Vento definition of homeless and FISBE definition of homeless? What are the differences? What are the similarities? There's a lot of layers there, and I know we have limited time, so maybe we just hit the high points.
Yeah, so I'm happy to say something about our definition, and I also know the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness has a report or an appendix that compares the definitions of homelessness for HUD, HHS, and ED. And so our statutory definition, it's section 725.2, and the part cutting across all agencies is lacking a fixed, regular, adequate nighttime residence. So our liaisons do get involved in that determination. Then there are 9 subparts, but the first one is about sharing the housing of others due to loss of housing, economic hardship, or other reasons. And that's the 85% of the unaccompanied homeless youth population at the point of identification that we're reporting on. And then I think the sheltered and unsheltered categories span a couple of those 9 clauses. And then we also have those staying in hotels and motels, of course, due to lack of any other adequate accommodation. And so I know that part is different between us and HUD. I don't know about for FISBE's definition, the hotel motel stay, and that actually, I'm realizing it's been a while since I've looked at this. I wish Christina Dukes from NCHE, who I know presented today, were here to help point out some of the differences. I know you have a length of a duration of being homeless. We don't. You can be homeless just for one night or for a couple school years. We don't have any time period.
Great, thanks, John. And ours is really around two particular statuses. You've either run away from home and you've done so without permission if you're under the age of 18, and if you're over the age of 18, homeless youth is really defined by no safe and appropriate place to return. And that's between the ages of 16 and 22. And they're really focused on the service delivery element. So for transitional living programs, it's that 16 up to 22 with no safe and appropriate living place to return to. So ours are very streamlined in comparison to the McKinney-Vento definitions. So thank you for all of the questions. We had a lot more coming in and we were running short on time. We've captured all of these and we'll make sure that we farm them out to the appropriate respondent so that we can find a mechanism to answer those questions that we weren't able to get to. In our last few moments, I want to turn things back to Jeff Daniels, and Jeff is going to talk briefly about our colleague, Aaron Kelvington. Jeff?
Thanks, Chris. And thank you all for your patience this afternoon. We wanted to take the time we did lose a colleague this past year, and we know that many of you may have lost colleagues. We want to take the time to reflect and just remember one of our colleagues, Aaron Kelvington, who was the regional program manager in what we called Team Midwest. We do have a video that we want to show you. This video isn't necessarily of Aaron, but Aaron would want us to celebrate. He would want us to watch this video. He sent this video. He liked this video. He used to laugh at this video, and we talked about it. And so we just wanted to show it to you. Sit back, relax, watch it. I know Aaron would hope that you all would get as big a kick out of it as he would. So if you wouldn't mind cueing the video now, please.
You know I can be found living all alone. You can run around. Oh, please, please, telephone. Don't be cruel. Your heart that's true. Yo, baby, I made you mad. Something I might have said. You turned all around. Oh, the future looks bright instead. Don't be cruel. Your heart that's true. I don't want no other love. Baby, it's just you I'm thinking of. You know I can be found standing all alone. You can come around. Oh, please, please, telephone. Don't be cruel. Your heart that's true. I don't want no other love. Baby, it's just you I'm thinking of. Yeah, Ollie. Hey, Ollie. You know I can be found living all alone. You can come around. Oh, please, please, telephone. Don't be cruel. Your heart that's true. Your heart that's true. Yeah. Yeah, I said yeah, 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 oh yeah, 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 yeah.
So thank you, everybody, for that. That really kind of points out a little bit about Aaron's personality. We hope you enjoyed that very much. I know Aaron did. So we just wanted to share that with you. I wanted to take a little bit of time today just to talk a little bit about Aaron and share a few things. I do know that our lives are certainly empty in the areas that he had brightened for us. Albert Einstein said the value of a person should be seen in what they give and not what they're able to receive. In one word, Aaron was a person who gave. He gave much to his work, to the Runaway and Homeless Youth Program. That is why I would really like to speak in celebration of his life. I met Aaron in 2016 when he joined the Family and Youth Service Bureau together. Aaron was a strategic thinker, a visionary who was innovative and creative. As such, he contributed much to the development of RHY's most recent initiatives. He generously gave his knowledge, expertise, and skills. Aaron was living proof of how fine a person can be. He was a good boss to the people in his charge, a loving husband to his wife, and a devoted father to his children. He was also a good friend to many of us and a great colleague. The character of life he lived might be summed up in a few words. He was sincere, he was earnest, he was loyal. As a regional program manager, Aaron led his staff in such a way that he exemplified leadership. He gave energy, commitment, and inspiration to his staff and to others with whom he worked. The Aaron I remember was a happy Aaron, as in evidence in the video, one who not only was cheerful in himself, but who gave much cheerfulness to others. He had a beautiful smile, a sense of humor, and a gentle demeanor. Aaron was bright, logical, and systematic in his thinking. He was always willing to share his ideas and information. Many of us found him to be a splendid person of great intellect and big heart. Aaron worked with passion, integrity, and energy. By his death, all the people who knew him will miss a highly intelligent, vibrant individual with a rare friendliness and charm of personality. Aaron was genuinely warm and wonderful individual, one we will miss greatly. Our sorrow is lessened only slight with the comforting thought that we had the privilege to know him. Our hearts and prayers are with the Kelvington family moving forward. Adlai Stevenson, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations from 1961 to 1965, once commented about a person and contribution. It is not the years in a life that counts, it is the life in the years. Ladies and gentlemen, Aaron lived. We will all miss him. Goodbye, Aaron. You will always be remembered and have a special place in our hearts. Thank you all for remembering Aaron. Aaron would have wanted everyone to enjoy the training, to learn, and to take back, at a minimum, a little something to help improve the lives for youth serve. And if you'd like, be sure and visit the expo, Remembering Aaron Kelvington, for a slideshow and do a little bit more about his life. Please enjoy the rest of the training, and we hope you enjoyed our memory of Aaron.